Most people think of Romania as just another post-Soviet country, if they think of it at all. But behind the image lies a hidden history of kings, communists, and revolutions. It was once ruled by a dictator who outlawed birth control, rationed food intake, and drove the country into starvation, all in the name of progress. Romania survived his period and brought it to an end, in the best way possible.
And as he was exhorting them, all of a sudden, one old lady yelled, "Liar." And then 10 people, and then 1,000 people, and then 10,000, and then 100,000.
Not only that, it adapted, it rebuilt, and today it's one of the most underestimated countries in Europe. So how did it all happen? Was it really communist? Was it ever free? And how close did Romania come to total collapse? This is the real story of Romania. Communism in Romania. Romania is not the first country that comes to mind when you think of World War II, but it is among those that were changed completely by the war. You probably think of tanks rolling through France, loud and deadly bombs that hit Japan, or that one guy with a moustache and zero chill. But Romanians think of the decades they lost because of the war, not necessarily during the war, but after. Romania during World War II, though not a key player, was on the Axis side. As we all know, Romania is in Eastern Europe, and after the Axis lost the war, all of its Eastern European allies were put under the USSR's influence. It was there that communism rose to power in Romania. Now that you've seen the big picture, let's rewind and introduce you to one specific leader. King Michael officially took the throne in 1940, but while he wore the crown and held the title, he didn't actually hold the power. The real authority belonged to this guy, Ion Antonescu, a pro-Nazi military dictator who had aligned Romania with the Axis powers during World War II. Everything changed in 1944. At just 22 years old, King Michael led a bold coup to overthrow Antonescu, with the backing of the Allied forces. Romania switched sides in the war, and for a brief moment it looked like the country might step into a new era under a young monarch who wasn't tied to communism or capitalism. He was simply anti-Nazi, and that was enough for the Allies to support him, at least temporarily. After the war ended, the leaders of the US, UK, and the Soviet Union met at the Yalta Conference and agreed that countries like Romania would hold free and fair elections to determine their future. In theory, this meant Romania could have chosen its own path, and with King Michael's popularity, it's likely he would have won those elections. But that's not what happened. The Soviet Union rigged the process and installed Romania's Communist Party into power. Just a few years later, on December 30th, 1947, King Michael was forced to abdicate. He was sent into exile, and Romania officially entered its communist period, not by choice, but through foreign interference. Starting from 1948, communist leaders laid the foundations for a totalitarian regime. They adopted a Soviet-style constitution that reserved ultimate authority for the party. The nation became a Stalinist communist state. Central planning and heavy industry were the primary focus of the government, and collectivization of agriculture was also enforced. During this period, intellectuals, former elites, and even communists who opposed the Soviet-style rule were imprisoned or disposed of completely. All this time, Romania remained a satellite state, or in other words, a puppet state for Russia. The USSR either directly or indirectly controlled all of their internal and external affairs, and Soviet troops had also been stationed in Romania since the end of World War II. And to some extent, the Soviet Union was responsible for communism and lack of political freedom in the country. But things started to improve from 1958 onwards. Soviet troops started to leave the country, and gradually Russia's hold on Romania started to loosen a bit. 1958 to 1965 marks the period of the rise of nationalism and de-Russification of Romania. During this period, Romania opened trade with the West and other non-communist countries. Living standards of local citizens also got better as the availability of consumer goods and housing improved, and the government became more generous with social services such as healthcare, education, and pensions. But all of this was the calm before the storm. How? Let's understand in the next section. But before that, if you enjoy learning more about today's economic stories, be sure to subscribe. Thanks. Worse than communism. In April 1964, Romania declared itself independent of the Soviet Union under the leadership of Georgiu Dej. Everything was going right for Romania, as the nation was feeling a sense of sovereignty and the living standards of citizens, trading opportunities with the West were expanding. Overall, Romania was drifting away from Stalinist communism. But then came something much worse, a dictatorial regime. Georgiu Dej died in March 1965 and was replaced by his successor, Nicolae Ceausescu, who went on to become the villain of Romania. Not only was he a dictator who'd purged every one of his political rivals, but his economic policies would also destroy the national economy. Before we move on to what actually happened, let us clarify one aspect. Nicolae Ceausescu was the General Secretary of Romania's Communist Party and was undoubtedly an ideological communist. It isn't wrong to say that in this period, Romania was a communist country. However, his economic policies were slightly different from the common perception of communism. Thus, it wouldn't be fair to link his failures with the word communism. Ceausescu's independent, nationalistic political course won him popular support at the start of his career. He, throughout his career, remained an anti-Soviet figure. At the start of his reign, he ended Romania's active participation in the Warsaw Pact military alliance. He condemned the Warsaw Pact's invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968 and of Afghanistan in 1979. His narrative did make him a popular figure, but looking back at it, there was never anything good about him except for his anti-Soviet narrative. He outlawed contraception and abortion in 1966. During his government, doctors monitored women of childbearing age to ensure that they were not taking steps to curtail their fertility. Women who'd abort their babies would face imprisonment along with the medical staff who helped them. But maternal mortality rates skyrocketed as women sought unsafe and outlawed means to terminate their pregnancies. In terms of political freedom, his tenure was much worse than earlier. His secret police maintained rigid controls over free speech and the media and tolerated no internal dissent or opposition. When it comes to the national economy, his policies were much worse than those of his predecessors. To boost the economy, he took massive loans from Western nations and rapidly industrialized the country. This artificially boosted the economy and temporarily improved the living standards, but it got the nation into a debt crisis. Romania somehow survived the 1970s, but started deteriorating as soon as the 1980s began. By the end of 1981, the foreign debt amounted to almost $11 billion. In the first half of 1982, Romania was in a situation of sovereign default. The IMF assistance stopped de facto, and there were outstanding arrears to about 300 Western banks. In addition, they also had loans to pay back to several other banks in the USSR and the Middle East. It seemed that Romania would never get out of this crisis. But then, Ceausescu took some extreme measures. His measures did make his nation debt-free in the years to come, but the citizens struggled as if they had defaulted. He, in 1982, ordered the export of much of the country's agricultural and industrial production, not saving what the people needed. The result? Extreme shortages of food, fuel, energy, medicine, and other basic necessities. To deal with those shortages, his government introduced the Rational Eating Program, implying that the people were eating too much. They limited everyone's caloric intake by rationing almost everything. Every food necessity was rationed, and people were given bread, sugar, oil, etc. as per their quota. It was illegal to make food stockpiles, and those who did were sanctioned. Although his austerity measures did get Romania debt-free, the citizens paid a heavy cost. Was all of this any better than a sovereign default? I don't think so. In fact, in that case, the government would have had to pay some price. But that's not what happened in Romania. Ceausescu kept living a luxurious life, along with his wife Elena, and many members of his extended family, whom he appointed to high posts in the government and party. Living standards were drastically lowered, but as they say, even the darkest night ends with a dawn. Romanians decided to remove him. Massive protests broke out by the end of the decade, and at one of them in Timișoara, Ceausescu ordered his security forces to fire on anti-government demonstrators on December 17, 1989. Following that, the protests spread to Bucharest, and then on December 21, 1989, the very next day, the Romanian army defected to the demonstrators. Following that, Ceausescu and his wife fled the capital in a helicopter, but were captured and taken into custody. On December 25th, the couple was hurriedly tried and convicted on charges of mass murder and other crimes. Ceausescu and his wife were immediately afterward shot by a firing squad. If you're a fan of Ceausescu, which I don't think any of you are, you'll argue that everything he did with good intentions. Well, we don't know about that, but his policies did mess up his country, and if he actually had good intentions, he would have resigned with dignity a long time ago, and the nation wouldn't have had to execute him publicly. The good thing is the nation did get rid of him, and from then on, we're seeing the rise of the new Romania. A new Romania. From the 1990s onward, we've seen the rise of a new Romania. With the execution of Ceausescu, the dictatorship in Romania has gone once and for all. Some might say that the new Romania became capitalist. Others would say it's evolved into social democracy. But the fact is, it's resilient. Unlike in the past where Romania developed industry with loans, the new Romania found its strength in its people. Unlike the past where trade and alliances were limited, the new Romania explored every opportunity it got, including joining NATO and the EU. The new Romania also welcomed back the old King Michael, who was forced to abdicate in 1947 and live his life in exile. 50 years later, in 1997, Michael regained his Romanian citizenship and was given back part of the royal family's properties in 2000. Today, we're not going into the details of what the resilient Romania looks like, but if you haven't watched already, we highly recommend watching our previous video on why Romania is more powerful than you think from the link in the description. Before we conclude this video, here's a shout out to @mproof95, whose comment inspired today's video. In the end, Romania had to go through 2 decades of Stalinist communism and then 2 decades of dictatorship. But in the end, they won with a lifetime of resilience. Grit, hard work, faith, and culture were the attributes that always stood in the hearts of Romanians and led them to the ultimate victory. Share with us your thoughts in the comments below. If you stayed until the end of the video, drop a Romanian flag emoji. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay tuned. We'll see you in the next one.